Hi everybody, this is Jordan Rosenberg, and I didn't want to just do a PowerPoint because I wanted to be able to explain my reasoning behind some of the quotes that I put on the next few slides. Today I'm going to be talking about philosopher Maxine Greene. I chose her because I realized in assignment 1 I didn't talk about any female philosophers. So for this project I really wanted to find a female philosopher and talk about her impact on education. Maxine Greene was around up until 2014, so her ideologies are in the post-Enlightenment category. So with all that being said, I'm just going to dive in. As you can see from her personal biography, she was born Sarah Maxine Meyer in Brooklyn on December 23rd, 1917, to parents Max and Lily Meyer. Her parents actually owned a company that made costume jewelry, which I found to be pretty cool. She attended the Berkeley School for her undergrad and later attended Barnard College, where she earned her master's and PhD in philosophy and education. She later joined the Teachers College, and she was the only woman to be in the philosophy and education department. Maxine was married twice. Her first marriage didn't last too long, and her second marriage actually lasted for 50 years until her husband passed away in the late 90s. Maxine had a very strong influence on education. You can see I have a couple quotes from Weber here. I won't read them out, but I will explain why I chose to put them on this slide. I really liked the first quote from Weber because he really just describes how she was able to connect to her students. She would use a lot of cultural references, which is actually pretty helpful when trying to get on a student's level. The loyalty and admiration that came with her students probably came because she didn't see herself as someone who was above them, and she had them really feel like they were on her level to connect to her a little bit more easily. I know that when I'm able to connect to a teacher or educator, it makes me want to do better in that class, almost just out of respect. The second quote I really liked because it describes a little bit more of her teaching method and how it didn't feel super structured, which helped the students learn a little bit better. She wasn't a rigid person, and she really wanted to make the classroom environment fun and exciting for her students, so that way they would voluntarily be involved in the lesson. Like everything else Maxine Greene did, she explained reality and what is real in a way that her students could understand. Vandenberg says that this enables students to use curriculum content to establish the meaning not of their lives as if they were wordless subjects, but of the existential situations confronting them. To me, this means that Greene was really trying to find what was important in the students' lives so that way they could understand their own reality and what that would mean to them. As you can see, I have a little bit larger of a quote from Vandenberg, and I'll give you a second to read that. I liked this quote because it sort of explains how she would connect different works of art for her students to understand things. So she's talking about how literary works are able to help students kind of come up with answers on their own about reality and transcendence. We don't need to accept the world around us, and we should try to break out of the box to see what else is out there. And the last quote, Vandenberg explains how Greene believed existence determines consciousness, but dialectically. Wherever multiple possibilities exist, one is free to choose from among them. So basically, this is saying, even though it's hard to determine what reality really is, we and students can come up with our own realities, and we have the freedom to do what we want with them. According to Shaw, Greene believed knowledge grows out of beliefs that have been subjected to reflection. and goes on to say that Greene believed the ultimate purpose of education is to help students and their teachers create meaning in their lives, which ties her into thoughts on reality. So her epistemology and metaphysics kind of will end up going hand in hand. Education and knowledge can help form the world around a person. Shaw goes on to say that education at its best is a process of teaching people to explore ideas about themselves and the world in which they live, to ask questions about the experience called living, and to embrace ambiguity, to notice the unusual without fear, and to look upon the ordinary with new eyes. So as we learn, as we gain new knowledge, we're able to find answers to the things that we have questions for. And it's okay to ask questions. Gaining knowledge and asking questions and finding answers doesn't have to be scary, even though sometimes finding the answers to certain questions may not be the answers that we wanted, but it doesn't have to be scary. And you can almost find peace of mind in finding those answers. Greene had a lot of thoughts on ethics, and I was actually able to find a primary resource from her, which I thought was pretty cool. And it was a little bit easier for me to understand her thoughts coming from her rather than a secondary source. When discussing ethics, Maxine Greene talked a lot about the other and the relationship to the other. As you can see, I have a little bit of a block quote. I chose this quote because I liked how it said, you can't be a fully ethical person without imagining yourself with someone else. And I think this is important when it comes to education because sometimes students will think without acting, and we need to teach them about how somebody else would feel if they were put in their shoes. I know I personally wouldn't want to be picked on for a certain thing, so I would make sure not to pick on somebody else because of a certain thing. Greene goes on to discuss how important it is to have face-to-face interactions with people and really study somebody's face. To fully experience being an ethical person, you really need to see what's going on the other person's face. Seeing what somebody else has gone through is extremely important. Maxine Greene thought of aesthetics in terms of education. And the first quote I have on this slide really explains how showing students, or even from a young age, inviting them into the different types of art there are, can help them create meaning and help them understand other things going on in their lives. Maxine Greene is a reminder that people are not interested in schools, but are interested in education, quote, and that aesthetic education, as we understand it, is not in any sense a fringe undertaking, end quote. This spoke a lot to me because sometimes when we think of school or going to school, some of us dread it. But I know when I was a student in my undergrad, there were certain classes I just couldn't wait to get to because I loved learning the specific subject matter. So even though I had plenty of times where I just didn't want to be in school, I was excited to learn just about every day because I was excited about what we were studying. And I found a lot of beauty in that, and I saw the value even more so of my education. And in the last quote on this page, I chose it because I think it explains that when we look at things, we need to look at them with an open mind. And I think that that is really important in education because a lot of things that we can read can be biased or something like that. And if we can kind of go into something with an open mind, I think it helps us take in information. That's why I think looking at two sides of an argument is also important, because even though you may side with a specific point in the argument, it's still important to see where the other person is coming from to have a better conversation. And I think that Maxine's thoughts on aesthetics goes along great with that. On gaining knowledge and thinking, Greene describes, quote, thinking as a soundless dialogue and internalized dialogue through which we talk things over with ourselves. In order to engage in it, we have to stop and think, and inevitably it interrupts ordinary activities," end quote. She explains that if people went on to not think, they would get easily caught up in their daily routines. In order to be logical, educators need to help students to not get caught up in the flux of things. They need to be taught to stop, think, and evaluate a situation to come to a logical conclusion. I know that it happens to me a lot when I think of all of the things that I need to do, especially at work. I get very caught up in the little things, and luckily most of the time I'm able to realize I'm getting caught up, and I take a few minutes for myself to breathe, to just stop and think about what I'm doing and how I can try to make my life a little bit easier and get what I need to get done. And I think this is important for a lot of students, especially as they get into high school and are getting ready to go to college. There's a lot going on. They have SATs, they have the classes that they're taking at that moment, they're trying to get their extracurriculars together, and within all those things, they can get pretty caught up in their daily routines without really thinking about the bigger picture. As educators, I think it's important that we don't belittle what their issues are, but we need to remind them that it's okay to breathe. It's okay that they may not be able to please everyone, and that they need to do what's best for themselves. Here are just a few of my thoughts on why I think Maxine Greene is a significant voice in education, and basically why I chose her for this assignment. I think that she was ahead of her time and truly inspiring for women. I think she paved the way for women to get into this field. She was able to see things from the student's point of view, and from their constructed ways of teaching them things on their level. After reading up on who she was and what she did, I knew I had to do this project on her. It's so important for an educator to take a step back and remember why they're teaching. It's all about the students and meeting their needs. If something's not working, we need to evaluate our practices and see how we can better reach the students. I recently went to a lecture at Plymouth State, and there was a math professor who spoke about how she changed the curriculum around for 3 of her classes because she just realized that her students were not leaving her courses better prepared for the next course in their study. So for example, she would teach Calc 1 and she wouldn't leave feeling good about them going on to Calc 2. So she really figured out what the students needed more so from her, and from there changed around her entire syllabus, which can be hard when you've been sort of teaching the same model for so many years. And I really commended her because there aren't many professors that would be willing to sit and take the time to change how they've been doing things. And I think it's great that this specific professor was able to realize that she was not meeting the students' needs. And I think that Maxine Greene was a trailblazer in this type of education. I'm sure we've all had the teacher or even the substitute teacher that just was always in a bad mood, and you would wonder why they want to be around young people all day long if they hate their jobs so much. And you could tell that Maxine Greene really loved what she did because she was willing to stay current on what the students were taking in daily and bringing in some cultural references and just doing what she could to get them to understand. And for that, I think that she was worth the time to do this project on. And lastly, here are all of my lovely references. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to my presentation on Maxine Greene.